Yeah, so the title of the webinar, You're Not Alone, the Benefits of Joint Working. So Ben, if you could go on to the next slide for me. So we're actually kind of delighted actually that we're working in partnership with the Cooperative Hive programme to bring you this webinar today. And we actually did a webinar in partnership with the Hive last week as well around just the general kind of constructs of cooperative working. So if those of you who don't know much about the Hive programme, it's actually a business support programme aimed specifically at developing cooperatives across the UK. And we're actually the framework provider that provides support through the Hive programme for organisations or people thinking about setting up cooperatives in Wales. And the Hive programme then kind of sits alongside our Social Business Wales intervention of support. So, you know, we're delighted to be working in partnership with the Hive. And I think through that intervention and Social Business Wales, we've got a really good infrastructure of business support aimed at the sector. And importantly, it's specialised support that recognises the kind of particular kind of needs really that individuals need to consider when setting up cooperative and social enterprise structures. So why the conversation this morning really? I mean, interestingly, back in 2016, we worked with Cooperatives UK and Unity Trust Bank to put a report together called Not Alone. And the premise of that report was to kind of almost highlight the shift in nature really within the UK in terms of normal work pattern, and particularly looking at the increase of individuals who had become self-employed, who had become freelancers, and that exponential growth wasn't going to stop. And I think interestingly now with the COVID situation, we've got some people who have gone into kind of freelancer self-employment options because that's something they wanted to do. They felt it would give them more freedom, for example, in their everyday life to take more control over the way they work. But I think what COVID has shown and the gig economy, and I know Paul's going to talk a little bit about this in his presentation, we now have this kind of huge mass of individuals who feel they've had to go into self-employment almost in a forced position. So we're kind of this kind of construct which is now being used, the kind of the necessity entrepreneur, which, you know, I feel almost kind of is very contradictory to what entrepreneurialism is all about. You know, an entrepreneur to me is somebody I feel is somebody who kind of galvanizes that kind of business spirit and just feels that they want to kind of go ahead and set businesses up. Well, a necessity entrepreneur almost kind of contradicts really the kind of self-evolving nature of that kind of entrepreneurial spirit. But I think that is the situation that we're in the UK. We are seeing an increase in obviously kind of 0-hour contracts. And I think, you know, gone are the times where people just have one job. I think, you know, I think we more commonly see this construct of people having what they call a portfolio really of jobs, where they might be working kind of several part-time jobs that collectively form a full-time salary for people. So we feel that never more kind of is needed really is a conversation about how we not just protect people, but how people can feel kind of self-supported and peer supported within that environment of working as a freelancer, because it can be a very lonely place otherwise. And particularly in terms of the type of services you might want to be delivering, actually kind of working by yourself can actually be a particular challenge, particularly when you're looking at tender opportunities and being able to respond to the scale of opportunity that you might be considering. And that's not actually just for kind of freelancers, even for micro businesses, small enterprises. And we've got some representatives from some social enterprises around the table today, the virtual table. Even that, you know, we're seeing the, you know, opportunities becoming bigger and bigger because kind of particularly public sector organizations are kind of combining opportunities. And so again, you guys need to be thinking more proactively about joint working opportunities to be able to kind of be in a position to look at those kinds of service delivery opportunities coming out. So very timely kind of discussion today. Ben, do you want to go on a slide for me? So we're kind of a small group, so I wanted to try to make this as interactive as possible really, which I know perhaps fills some with dread when they come on a webinar because they like to just turn the camera off and turn the mute off and then just carry on with their breakfast. But I was kind of hoping for a little bit of a conversation. So I'm just wondering, just, you know, in general, why you're interested in this webinar this morning and why you're thinking about kind of working together and the benefits it might afford you. So I'm going to pick on Gillian because I can see Gillian in my screen. Gillian, just out of curiosity, what kind of interests you in this morning's session, and why were you interested in kind of working together?
I think two reasons. One is that I come from a charity, and we have great difficulty, I feel, working with people formally. So great working on the sort of public service element. So public services work together really well. But when it comes to organisations working with other organisations, a lot of suspicion, a lot of competition, and which I don't totally understand. So that's one reason. The second reason is that I have a feeling we're going to have huge economic problems in a few years. That's quite good now, but we're getting quite a lot of money in. But in a year or two, it's going to be very different. So I'm wondering how we can form a different organisation, not necessarily in place of, but as well as, which involves possibly a lot of people that are self-employed.
Okay, thanks, Gillian. I really appreciate that contribution. Eva, what about yourself?
I guess I do work with other people quite a bit. I'm an independent individual strategy consultant, so a lot of the work I do is too big for one person to deliver, and I work with others in a sort of range of different constructs. On a few occasions, I have led on a bid and have brought other people in. On other occasions, I've teamed up with other people, and I work a lot through other consultancies. And that works fine, but I suppose I'm just curious to sort of see who else might be in the same situation as me, as in an individual freelancer, and what the sort of different forms might be of working together. Because I suppose, Gillian, you mentioned this point that there is obviously a degree of competition then between organisations and equally freelance, individual freelancers who work in a similar field. So it would need some thought about how can you work together while at the same time competing in certain areas. And to tell you the truth, I've only just started to think about this again, because so far working individually has worked reasonably well. But it would be nice to sort of operate through a group of people and from a sort of more continuous basis of relating to each other more regularly and identifying opportunities that do or don't work to work on collaboratively. So yeah, curiosity really about what the different models might be and who else is out there, you know, because I guess that's one of the things that it's actually quite difficult to find the fora where you can talk to other individual freelancers who might work in a sort of related area.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Eva. Paul, you're next on my list. It's nice to see you. I think last time I saw you, Paul, was a long time ago. So why have you joined us this morning, Paul? Well, Paul, you're on mute. You win the bingo prize for the first person to be on mute.
But I've unmuted now, I think. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Paul.
Yep. Well, you know, I've been running social enterprises for about 30 years now. But I'm really interested at the moment because I'm supporting two particular groups who are based around expanding the men's shed network. Are you all aware of men's sheds?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And of course, sheds need, they largely volunteer run, but they need spaces to work out of, buildings to work out of, they need resources, they need volunteer help. And I think that there's one particular project in the Rhondda at the moment that I'm trying to support, which is trying to take over the Mid-Rhondda Athletic Ground, which was set up in 1903, got a huge heritage and culture, been great benefit to the local community, but is being looked at by the local authority for social housing. And the group would like to keep the space for open spaces and to, you know, relive its glory days where it can be a community sport which will involve sport. So my advice to the group would be that we need partners to work with. We're a voluntary group, we don't have loads of resources, but there are a number out there. So I just thought I'd come back in and you know, revisit this partnership working thing, really.
Yeah, no, okay, really timely for you then. That's great. And Chris and Jess, there's no pressure because your cameras are off, so I don't know whether you want to be kind of active participants or you're want to just be kind of observers this morning, but would either of you like to make a contribution?
Hi, this is Chris.
Hi, Chris.
I had recently employment situation has changed. I used to run my own company, Propona, software development, IT consultancy. This webinar popped up on my Twitter feed, and I thought I'd just pop in and see what it's all about,
Okay.
with a view to possibly rekindling my company and doing more freelance and putting more work through there.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks for joining us. And
Thanks.
last but not least, Jess.
Hiya. I'm new working at Carers Wales actually, so I've just come along to observe really and look for opportunities for carers that might want to go back into work and work jointly. It's just really here to learn. So.
Yeah, okay. No, that's brilliant. Thank you. Oh, thanks for
having me.
Yeah, no, our pleasure. Okay, no, that's great, and thanks for engaging. So I know sometimes the kind of, as I said, people like to just be observers on webinars and not kind of actively participate. So no, that's really helpful. Ben, if you could go on a slide for me. So again, there's just some general things here in terms of why we consider that it's benefit for people to work, and lots of those things have already been kind of brought up actually in your contributions around kind of peer support, looking at kind of, into trading, opportunity to kind of bid for larger contracts, things around kind of, brand recognition and thinking about how you can create a brand that's perhaps bigger than your kind of, yourself, particularly if you're a kind of a freelancer, which sometimes is kind of raises confidence within the market really in terms of that kind of broader brand recognition. But even things such as sharing skills, sharing knowledge, kind of sharing risk around kind of innovation, there's lots of reasons why we feel it's important for people to work together. And what we want is we're seeing an awful lot of consortia formation of kind of almost what I would consider to be rushed partnerships, which are more reactive to, for example, a tender opportunity coming up and kind of organisations who perhaps are incumbent suppliers where the contract's being reconfigured, and all of a sudden they're recognising that they are going to have to partner with people to be able to deliver what the kind of the purchaser wants, and it's almost a kind of a rush partnership. But actually what we've put here are more strategic business opportunities, which for me are opportunities to look more proactively at how you can work together. And I think Paul's kind of example that he's going to talk through is exactly that really. It's, it's proactively recognising the significant shift in the marketplace and how then that cohort of drivers needed a new approach to be able to work together. So again, I'm really pleased that Paul's on the call. Ben, if you can go on a slide. And I go back to my fish, Ben. If you skip past my fish, I love my fish. Don't go past the fish. And I don't know why there's a big kind of black mark in the middle of my fish now, which is really bothering me. Oh, there you go. The black mark's gone. So yeah, I mean, I love this kind of this diagram, and I think it's a simple kind of pictorial in terms of the opportunity really for kind of consortia working. And I think at the time when we put this together, and I've used this kind of presentation slide for kind of many years, I think it was about kind of trying to compete with the big boys. But I think now in the current economic climate, it's not about trying to kind of compete, it's about trying to survive. And I think the context is very different, but I think if we all can work to survival at the moment, and with peer support and with that kind of collaborative kind of infrastructure that's based around cooperative principles, and I think it will give people a more kind of sustainable platform to grow. So slightly different context, but I think the principles are still the same. So this morning, Ben, if you can go on, we are going to talk about cooperative structures, and some of the kind of cooperative models that we're going to look at include kind of the construct around worker cooperatives. We're going to look at cooperative consortia, and we're going to look at platform cooperatives as well, which I think are really relevant in today's climate, with the move towards kind of businesses using far more technology to underpin the way in which their businesses operate. But just to kind of remind us really around the core principles of what we mean by a cooperative. So it is an entity, a business that is owned and controlled by its members. So it's quite a unique structure, quite a unique business structure. And those members can be very much predetermined by what the organisation's been set up to do. So the members could be its employees through some sort of worker cooperative, it could be its customers, it could be its suppliers, for example, local residents, or it could be the users, the people that are actually using services of the cooperative. So for example, in Paul's case with the Drive Taxi cooperative. But essential to the cooperative's existence is the shared ownership, and therefore kind of a democratic voice and a say in how that organisation is run. So those organisations, those members have a very different relationship to that organisation than if, for example, you were just a kind of consumer, for example, going buying something, and then that's how your relationship ends. But if you're a member of that cooperative, you have a say in how that organisation works, and therefore you have more of a vested interest in how the organisation succeeds. And I think that's something, again, the Paul's going to touch upon. The other important point is that cooperatives are viable businesses. That's the other thing to stress here. I think sometimes there's a very kind of misunderstanding of when we talk about cooperatives, that you talk about this kind of sandals kind of brigade, and actually cooperatives are really viable businesses, and we're seeing cooperatives with multi-million turnover businesses as well. So for us, they're not just something that's a panacea for social good. They are a viable kind of model that should be within the mainstream kind of business portfolio that people consider when either setting up a business or thinking about kind of an alternative way of running their business. So really important in the current economic climate. And Ben, if you could go on one. So the cooperative principles, I'm not going to go through this, but these are the internationally recognized cooperative principles. And I think importantly, the starting point for anybody thinking about setting up a cooperative is thinking about the values that you want your organization to enshrine. Setting up a cooperative is not just a legal structure kind of decision. It's not just a case of saying, well, I'll just use this legal structure. It's actually thinking about the way you want to run that business. And to me, that's how you become a cooperative. It's enshrining these core cooperative principles in the way in which you run your business. And then as an example, or through the Hive program, you can work with individuals and consultants to help you put legal structures around that. But that's what you need to work on first, really, is the culture and the way in which the business is going to run, and the principles within which you want to underpin your business activity. So Ben, if you can go on one. So we're going to look at a few cooperative models for joint working this morning. So I'm going to go on to the worker cooperative model first. And I suppose this is probably it's an interesting one. Ben, if you can go on a slide for me. It's an interesting one because actually what we're talking about here is probably contrary to the kind of constructs around, for example, kind of freelancing. So we're talking about where individuals who actually work for an organization are the members. And I think that kind of creates a very different ownership structure. And we're very much kind of trying to promote a lot of the work in Wales around kind of employee-owned businesses, which is another term we use for a worker cooperative, has been very much driven by succession. So if you currently work for a business and the business owner is kind of owned privately, and the business owner is thinking about selling, for example, then actually rather than you feel that your business could be bought by a third party and your kind of jobs at risk, actually you as employees could take control of that business through an employee buyout. But what we want to try to do is promote the kind of the opportunity of worker cooperatives and employee-owned businesses far more for example, graduates coming out who kind of see themselves as being kind of more of a, having a more kind of self-employed based kind of employment future. But then by working with others, perhaps actually an opportunity is for them to get together and set up something they collaboratively own through a worker cooperative. And we've seen some really good examples of that. So Dullas, for example, is a renewable energy company in mid Wales that is worker owned. It's got social value at its core. It does very kind of social orientated kind of projects across the world. Social Enterprise of the Year 3 years ago, I believe. And that's been a worker cooperative from the outset. Actually, it was set up as a worker cooperative, and everybody that becomes an employee is expected to become a member. It's very much kind of enshrined within their core principles. Tregroes Waffles, another interesting kind of brand within Wales, and many of you, if you shop in the co-op, Tregroes Waffles will always be at the counter kind of trying to lure you in just before you make your purchase. Keith there, the business owner, he is looking at a succession route, and the employees are purchasing that business over a period of time, which actually just makes it more economically viable to do so. But again, I've got a video of another worker cooperative that we're going to show in a little bit. But again, I think just bringing the relevance of the worker cooperative model back to what we're talking about today it's about that peer support and perhaps just reconfiguring the way in which perhaps freelancers work collectively, where they might move from self-employed into an employment situation, but through a worker cooperative where they've got that peer support entrenched by the way in which they collectively own the organisation. So something I think is really relevant. Do you want to go on one, Ben? And then we've got cooperative consortia, which is probably the most common model used for joint working initiatives. Now, cooperative consortia can be structured in many different ways, and Eva, taking your kind of point about, well, what are the different forms of working together? You can have we often think about the kind of spectrum, really. So you can have cooperative consortia that very much operate, in my mind, at the very informal end of the spectrum, where you might have a gathering of people who have kind of, relatively kind of mutual interests, who come together to just share stories for peer support. It's more like a supported network, but they do it in a more kind of organized way, which then, kind of coins the term a cooperative consortia. But you can have then right the way through to a very formal level of consortia structure, which could actually be a first step towards merger. So I worked with a media kind of based cooperative in Swansea many years ago, and it was called That Useful Company. And originally they were a consortia of 5 individuals who all had very kind of complementary services in respect to marketing. So one was a social media expert, one was graphic design, one was a kind of copyright, and they all recognized that they were all struggling individually to get into the supply of services, for example, the local authority, because all of those tender opportunities coming out were for a collection of services as opposed to the one niche that they individually provided. So they came together, and we worked with them when we set them up as That Useful Company. And they were a company limited by shares initially, so they used a very kind of private sector kind of business model to take that forward. But then we worked with them to enshrine then cooperative principles within that private sector structure. They operated for around 2-3 years, and actually then in the end they decided to merge. So they all kind of decided to disband their own individual business concerns and actually create and actually merge then those individual business concerns into one entity that then became That Useful Company. So a slightly different structure, but can just kind of show you the more formal structured end of the spectrum. And there's a range of legal models that you can use here, but predominantly the key thing that makes a consortia work is the recognition of need. And I think everybody's got to be on that same page. Everybody's going to recognize what the benefit of being part of that consortia is, and being clear what the value that those individual members will derive from the consortia. I think that's really, really critical. And I've got some brands on the slide that you might recognize. I'm going to show you a video and talk a little bit about Denbighshire Music Cooperative shortly, but some of you will kind of know perhaps Craft in the Bay down in Cardiff Bay. And again, what Craft in the Bay effectively is, it's a sale platform for the artistic members. And interestingly, what they wanted was to create a kind of a platform for high-end artists. If you ever kind of go into Craft in the Bay, it's a very particular high-end type of product that they offer. They're very strict in terms of the individuals that could become members, because they're trying to protect the credibility and the kind of brand that they have built. But effectively, those individual artists then sell through the brand of Craft in the Bay, which has given them increased sale leverage. So again, you can see how you can support then individual artists. So they're not losing their freedom of creativity, but what you are giving them then is a bigger access to the broader sales market by using that brand. So Ben, if you can go on one. A couple of examples of consortia, and then we're going to go on to platform consortias in a moment. But again, thinking about kind of sole traders, self-employed individuals, is a really interesting kind of RN actors management, which is a cooperative consortium of actors. And actually what they used then, together, obviously they were struggling to kind of find work, but actually coming together allows them to create a platform to then that kind of platform actually kind of brokers kind of work on their behalf, looks at all the kind of legal contracts, etc., etc. So common and repetitive costs those actors were kind of experiencing individually, if you pool that requirement together, then becomes far more cost effective. So it's a really interesting model to look at. And Denbighshire Music Cooperative, again, it was a result of change in market. So up in North Wales, there was suddenly a shift from the local authority underwriting music provision within the local authority through schools to then saying, actually, we're going to withdraw that funding. So you had a whole host of individual music teachers who were used to providing tuition through the kind of education system, where suddenly that whole kind of funding platform was being withdrawn. So they came together, formed a brand called Denbighshire Music Cooperative, and then they worked with schools, education kind of establishments, and with kind of families on an individual basis to basically give those schools and families still an opportunity to get that music tuition, but through kind of more privately paid arrangements. And it's really successful, and actually it's one of those franchise models that we're looking at where we feel that it can be replicated across Wales, and it's already working now in 4 of the other local authority areas in North Wales. And is a really good example of how you can use an alternative model to react to what is seen as a kind of an economic failure, to kind of actually create something which is really economically positive and places the tutors at the heart of how that organisation is run. So it's a really, really good example. And then Ben, if you can go on to the next slide, and then I can shut up for a bit then, and we can hear some videos, and then I can bring Paul in, which would be great. So the other one to think about then is platform cooperative. So this is effectively where you have a digital platform that's designed to provide or sell a product on behalf then of members who actually use it. And we're seeing it far more within the kind of tech space, within kind of accommodation. We're seeing it, obviously through kind of like the arts and kind of cultural kind of creative space. But I think again, the conversation that Paul is going to have with you about Drive, thinking about again, those kind of platforms by which those kind of taxi drivers are able to kind of participate through is a really interesting one as well. So Ben, we've got a couple of videos for you to kind of introduce you to some of those cooperatives that I've just talked through. So we've got a video from a business owner of a media company called Cwmni Da, which has gone into employee ownership. So it's just a kind of, it just introduces you really to the kind of psychological thought process that owner went through and why the worker cooperative he felt was a really good future model for his business. And then we've got a short video on Denbighshire Music Cooperative. And then I'm going to introduce you to Paul. So Ben, do you want to play those 2 videos for me?
My name is Dylan Hughes, Managing Director of Cwmni Da. When I was thinking about future development of the company and an exit strategy as well, I did look at various options, including a market sale, management buyout, and we also started looking at the employee ownership model. And over a few months, I kept going back to this potential, which was a new sort of scheme for me at the time. It was something that I hadn't really looked at before, but it kept popping up. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought that this was the right way forward for the type of company that Cwmni Da is. It's got high employee engagement. There are people who've worked here for many years and are very committed to the furthering the growth and development of the company. And I thought that this would be a very good way to benefit the workforce and also to secure a satisfactory exit for myself, because there are advantages all round with employee ownership. The company changed over to employee ownership at the end of 2018. We had a bit of a Christmas party to celebrate, and so it's true to say that we're still quite early on in the process. Although the legal process is finished and all the necessary paperwork has happened, the shares have also been transferred into an employee trust. We're still in the early stages of engagement. I'm finding that staff are asking a different type of question nowadays than they used to ask. They're asking and wanting more information about how the company runs, financial information, and what the prospects of the company are looking at. Which is very different to what it used to be. I always used to think it was a collaboration, but I think that owners do sometimes tend to think that, whereas the workforce tend to see it in another sort of way. But now I think that it does actually truly feel like a true collaboration between everybody. I think everybody's now concerned about the same things. And it's an ongoing process from now on. I think that I'm learning a lot from what's going on, and I hope everybody else is doing the same as well. And it's an ongoing process that has to be managed and given guidance all the way along. It's not just a one-off hit and everybody gets on with their work. It's a process of change. Employee ownership was definitely the right route for Cwmni Da. It seems to work with the company ethos of being very strongly grounded in this area and with a very committed workforce. So it's working out well in those respects. Each company's got to find their own way of managing succession planning. It's not suitable for everybody, but it's definitely suitable for us. And if anybody is thinking of this route, just engage with it and have a look. There's lots of stuff out there, and there's lots of help you can get as well. I mean, we received some excellent help from Social Business Wales, and they're still there holding our hand through certain aspects of the process. So it is achievable, and it is worthwhile as well.
So my name's Heather Powell. I'm the director of Denbighshire Music Co-operative, and we're a not-for-profit schools music service based in Denbighshire in North Wales. We started the company with about 20 of us, and we've now got 60 teacher members out in the county. I think it's been pretty fantastic really, because we've saved lots of jobs, but we've also managed to expand the service, and lots of children accessing instrumental lessons, and we're all about music for all really, so every child having a go, not about those who can afford it really.
Thanks, Ben. So just some introductory kind of videos there for you to see the kind of organisations we're talking about. But I'm delighted that Paul is here from Drive Taxi Cooperative, who's got an amazing story really about kind of cooperation and action really between him and his members. And on that note, I'll hand over to Paul. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for letting me speak in front of you today. The gig economy. Now, it's a phrase that seems to have only become popular in the last few years with the onset of the likes of Uber and Ola and Uber Eats and what have you. And according to one definition, it's a labour market characterised by the prevalence of short-term contracts or freelance work as opposed to permanent jobs. And taking opposing viewpoints, it's either a working environment that offers flexibility with regards to employment hours, or it's a form of exploitation with very little workplace protection. Now, taxi drivers and especially private hire drivers have been subjected to these working conditions and practices for donkey's years. I mean, I think we are the original gig economy workers. Ride hailing, the e-hail, booking on an app. They're non-new concepts, and local companies were using these passenger apps to book taxis long before the massive multinationals come on the scene. They've not reinvented the wheel, even though they like to think they have. To receive work, every driver must have a job contracted to them from a private hire operator licensed by the relevant authority. And dependent on whatever company you were working with or for, you pay either a hefty commission on every job, or you pay anything between £100 and £150 per week to receive as much or as little jobs as you possibly can. And over the years, traditional taxi companies always held a vice-like grip on drivers, even though we were all self-employed. You couldn't work for more than one company. They would instill archaic rules and conditions on self-employed drivers. They could, and very often would, put a driver on stop for 24 hours, which means they couldn't receive any work for a whole day, so that's no income for that day. And they'd even make drivers pay extra in the run up to Christmas so that the company could afford to pay their staff, which they employ, a Christmas bonus. And it was coming out of the driver's pocket. And when Uber arrived in 2016 in Cardiff, they basically rode roughshod over local legislation, and in their first 6 months of trading here, they brought in approximately 1,000 extra drivers licensed as far afield as London, Lancashire, the Midlands, all through this loophole in legislation. And they were all working in Cardiff, which already had around 2,500 drivers of their own working here. So, like I say, traditionally, drivers have been very solitary, very insular even, and with Uber's arrival, it sort of mobilised the local drivers. We were all seeing our earnings decrease due to the sheer number of cabs on the road, and for the first time ever, we got organised. A few of us at that time privately said that about the cooperative model being ideal for the taxi company, but it never really got off the ground at the time. And in 2017, I attended a talk on the gig economy by Matthew Taylor, who was going around the country listening to different people about this new way of working in preparation for the publication of his Taylor reports, Taylor review later in the year. And it was there I first come across Mark Hooper from IndyCube. IndyCube's a office and desk sharing cooperative, mainly based in Cardiff, but they've got places all over the country. He really rammed home the case for worker-owned cooperative models. And the GMB union, we were all members of, then introduced us to Wales Cooperative Centre, who've been a great help, and they introduced us to the Southend Taxi Cooperative, who've been running now for about 7 years. And the Wales Co-op Centre funded mentorship from one of its founders, Mark Jennings, who we actually knew from national campaigns we'd been on. We all realised things had to change, and we had to be masters of our own destiny. So we had to think outside the box, and it was no good for those that formed this company to just start another cab company, run along the same lines as every other, where they subcontract drivers to work for their brand, whilst the drivers are still self-employed, still bear the brunt of all the expenses that come with running a cab. The fuel, insurance, plating, maintenance, all comes out of the driver's pocket. And as we're all experienced cabbies, we're all increasingly disillusioned, disenchanted, and disappointed with the way companies treated us. That was traditional companies and the new app-based companies, by taking a huge commission off each job. They were charging a hell of a lot of money for drivers every week just for the privilege of working for their brand. They've taken on more and more drivers to boost the company's profits, while the drivers' earnings was decreasing due to so many cars on the road. And the work never seemed to increase, but the number of drivers they took on did, and every company was exactly the same. So we formed a cooperative, basing ourselves at IndyCube. Cardiff Taxi Cooperative Limited was born in July 2018 by 8 Cardiff cabbies in response to the way self-employed drivers were being treated by more traditional and the modern day app-based companies. And after months of trialing different comms and dispatch systems to find what suited us best, we finally launched on St. David's Day 2019 as Drive. I mean, if you're from Cardiff, what better name for a taxi company? It's what the majority of passengers say as they get into a cab. All right, Drive, busy drive, been on long drive. So our customers are not subcontractors, they're not employees, and they're not just drivers. They are members of the cooperative, each with one share in the company. No one has more shares than the other, and everyone has an equal say in how the company's run. Everyone has an opportunity to express their views, and all decisions are democratically made and voted on by every member. What we also done, we also decided to run the company as a not-for-profit basis, so that every member gets to keep more of what they earned, instead of paying a hefty sum to their chosen operator. So where other companies charge anything from an average of 18% commission, sometimes up to 50% commission, on their weekly earnings, on drivers' weekly earnings, a drive, we pay an average of 8% as a membership fee. So we can save drivers potentially up to £5,000 a year. And also where other companies we fell short was where they didn't realise that a taxi company primarily has two types of customers. The drivers that pay them a hefty sum every week in order to obtain work from their system, and the actual customers that phone for a cab. Now, because of the way we run the company, all our members are happy and content in what they do, and a happy driver means a happy customer. All of us were being increasingly disappointed with the standard of drivers on the road over the last few years. Drivers seem to forget that they were in a service industry, and if you don't provide a good service, people won't use you again. Little things from like not opening doors to not helping with luggage or shopping. So many times we'd see a driver just flick a switch to open the boot and then sit on his ass and wait for the elderly customer to put his shopping in the boot. And that's not how we work. It's not how we operate. We provide a taxi service in Cardiff, an A to B solution with impeccable customer service in clean, tidy vehicles. And all our members realise that we are in the service industry. And for customers to return, we all need to provide a first-class service. So as I said, a happy driver means a happy customer, and that's something I hear constantly in feedback from our customers, that all our drivers seem so happy. They're not miserable like they were when they were working for other companies. And from the outset, we decided to offer anyone with a concessionary travel pass a free bus pass, which a 10% discount on all our metered fares. So we knew that in the long run we'd make savings on our expenses. So what better way than to pass some of those savings on to some of the most vulnerable members of our community? The elderly, the disabled, the infirm, the visually impaired, all benefit from cheaper taxi fares with us. And we don't increase our fares either when it's busy and demand is high, like the modern app-based companies do. We charge for council tariff, which is what we feel is fair and what the council deem fair. So what you see on the meter is what you pay. And we formed an excellent relationship with the visually impaired community in Cardiff, a section of the public that traditionally has found it very difficult to find a reliable and trustworthy taxi service. And due to our reputation with the visually impaired, we obtained the RNIB contract, the SightLife contract, among many other corporate contracts over the last 18 months. And our reputation spread amongst various organisations that represent the most vulnerable in the community, such as Cardiff People's First, which is a self-advocacy organisation run by and for people with learning disabilities in Cardiff. Various supported living accommodation providers all use us as their go-to taxi service because they know that they will get an excellent, safe and reliable service when they book with us. So in our first year's trading, we've seen our membership increase by 100%. And from a customer base of 0, we saw 20,000 bookings in the first 12 months. And then COVID struck, and I don't have to tell anybody how difficult it's been since the spring. We, along with many others in the taxi trade, took a massive hit, and we saw overnight 95% of our pre-booked work cancelled and an 80% drop in daily bookings. We had to think of ways to help the members who are still working and also to help the local community. So due to us being completely driver owned and all the decisions were made by us, we were able to lower the membership fees drivers paid to the very minimum, which meant drivers were paying the equivalent of between 1% and 2% commission on every job they done during the lockdown periods. And no other company could do that. No other company did do that. They're all in the profit-making business, and the only people who make a profit in our company are the drivers. So over our first year's trading, we had accumulated funds to provide, with a view to purchase a more advanced dispatch system, which would enable us to compete more with the bigger taxi companies in our field. And with the onset of the pandemic and what was happening there, all the members unanimously decided to use this money we'd set aside to pay for free shopping trips, free click and collect services, free prescription collections, and or for those who were shielding and self-isolating. Most of those had no support network around them. So we helped around 200 households with this, numerous times as well, with these free shopping trips and free click and collect services. My dog's barking. So to summarize, I think that if you're self-employed and you're in an industry where you have to rely on others to receive work from their platform, why don't you become the platform? All it needs is a handful of people with the same vision, the same determination, the same drive and ambition to get together, create that cooperative ethos amongst yourselves, and you'll watch that vision grow. And hopefully you can see from what we're doing at Drive, the differences not only we're making to our drivers, but also to our customers that use our service. We can make decisions that not only benefit the drivers, but everybody that uses us. And with modern technology the way it is today, I believe that it's never been easier or cheaper to create a platform where those that actually do the work benefit the most. And that is me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm sure your dog is barking with enthusiasm really about the cooperative model as well. So I'm quite sure he's he a member as well? Is he a member?
Yeah, dog.
Just to quickly add, Rian, I think Jessica's raised her hand and also Paul has raised his hand. So whether we want to take a couple of questions.
Well, I think they were kind of clapping really, the virtual clap. I love the virtual clap on Zoom. But on that note, you know, does anybody have any kind of questions for Paul or kind of comments or just kind of reflections and observations really on the kind of, you know, his fascinating story? Gillian, you've got your hand up. A physical hand as opposed to a virtual hand.
Yeah, it all sounds a great story, Paul. What are the sort of problems, though? I mean, what happens when you disagree, or, you know, how do you make sure that everybody gets a fair whack and all this sort of stuff? There must be some issues.
Yeah, there has been. Due to our standing as a cooperative society, we've got to abide by certain rules. We've got to have a board of directors. They are voted on by the members. We've currently got 4 board directors. They make the sort of business running decisions, all verified by the members. If there's any disagreements, it just simply goes to a democratic vote. There's been issues which I've put forward which has gone against me because the members voted against me. You just got to take it on the chin really, and trust the members to do what's right.
I think you've used the biggest word there, Paul, when it comes to kind of joint working is trust, you know, because it is about, you know, trusting people to not go for their own kind of aims. It's that collective good, isn't it? And that's where the kind of the spirit of cooperation always needs to fall around, isn't it? It's that, what is that kind of collective vision that you're all striving to work towards, where some individuals will then have to compromise potentially on their views of what they think is best for that kind of more cooperative good.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, traditionally taxi drivers, we all work on our own. We were all looking after number one, but since we've started Drive, we've seen more of a community spirit within us. Whereas before you try and get one over on drivers to try and get a better job. Now you don't. It's everything is run more cooperatively and more friendly because we're working together as opposed to working against each other. And we're all trying to do what's best, not only for our members, but for potential future members as well, who will join us as work increases.
And Gillian, in the second part of my presentation, now after we take a comfort break, I'm going to talk to you about some of the things you can think about with some of the, I mean, remedies sounds a bit strong, it's almost like a legal term, but just some of the things that you can build into your structure and process to kind of mitigate against some of those problems. So it's not saying they're not going to happen. And actually what we would always say is, foresee them happening, and then, you know, work collectively to put the solution in place, which is then enshrined in your kind of governance arrangements or your legal documentation to kind of, you know, to you have a process then that you've all agreed with for when you hit those eventualities. Paul, you've taken yourself off mute, so I'm wondering if you've kind of got something you want to contribute to this stage.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm not sure how much work there is at the core of running a cooperative, but do they have any paid staff at the core?
No, not at the moment. Our plan was to start employing staff to answer calls, and we were on track to do that, but then COVID struck, so we put everything on hold. And to be honest, it was a godsend because that we didn't take on staff before COVID, because all the furlough and everything else would have just been one more headache for us to deal with. So at the moment, every job is done by the drivers. We answer the calls, we dispatch the work, we invoice customers, we do everything. And like I say, eventually we would love to have enough members on board to pay staff to answer calls 24/7. I can't see that happening for another year at least.
And the only other thing, do your drivers get in work from any other sources?
Yeah, we're all still self-employed. We can still work for whoever we like. Most of us just work for Drive, but there's still a few who will, if we're quiet for an hour or two, they'll log on to Uber or Ola and just top up their income that way. And we've got no issue at all with working for anybody.
I think what you raised there, Paul, is a really interesting point. This is why I get so frustrated when organisations are pushed into situations where they have to almost form what I consider to be kind of panic-stricken kind of consortia to respond to a kind of, you know, a change of contract, or, you know, for example, because there are so many things that need to be talked through, and the way, you know, those things you just mentioned there around membership, you know, is the way in which members engage with the consortia, both in terms of, you know, do you want to have exclusivity kind of, you know, structures in place where they only work through that organisation, or if they work with, you know, if they don't, like Paul's situation, are they kind of, you know, do you need to ensure that they're not going to be working with organisations then that are going to be natural competitors, or kind of, you know, how, you know, you're not going to be named in, you know, in two different kind of consortia bids, for example, if you're looking to kind of tender for work. So there's a lot of things that need to be thought through to ensure that everybody's clear, both in terms of, you know, how the cooperative is going to succeed, what the membership relation is going to be, what the cooperative is going to give to the member, but also what the cooperative is expected to give back to the member, both in terms of support, activity, but also respect, you know. And I think that that's a key thing as well, is respect for the way in which the consortium is being set up to run. Any other comments from anybody? So, oh, Eva, you've got to bow out now. So it's nice to see you. We were going to take just a quick 5-minute comfort break. So I'm conscious that we've been on for an hour. So if everybody is happy just to stay on and just kind of mute yourselves, pop your camera off, or you can leave your camera on if you like, but just mute yourself just for 5 minutes, just so everybody can go and take a quick comfort break, and then we'll come back and then we'll just kind of talk through then some of the practical considerations that you need to consider when setting up joint working vehicles. And I'm going to kind of bring Paul in as well then as part of that discussion, because, you know, you can share some of the practical kind of process that he went through as well. So we'll see everybody in, it's 11:05 now, so we see everybody 11:10, 5 minutes. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thanks all. just give everybody another couple of minutes, I think.
Rhiannon, if it does go on, I'll just slip away. Is that okay? You're muted.
Absolutely, Gillian. Yeah, you manage your own time, and actually on this, I couldn't stop you anyway on a virtual platform. So no, of course, yeah, not a problem. I think we probably will finish probably but just after 11:30, 11:45, I think. But yeah, of course, yeah. There we go. Okay, I think we'll we said 10 past anyway, so I think we'll make a start back. Thanks to everybody for coming back. Hopefully you're nice and refreshed. So Ben, could you pop the presentation back up? So I'm just going to take you through just some practical things that you need to consider when you're thinking about setting up some sort of kind of cooperative structure for joint working. And through these slides, I mean, Jess, you raised the point about whether we can share the slides, and yes, of course, we're more than happy to send the slides out post the webinar this morning. So there's quite a bit on the next few slides. I'm not going to go through every single bullet point, but I'm just going to pick up some key elements and then bring Paul in actually to just to comment on some of those things. So, and actually, Gillian, it was a point that you made about the kind of non-competitive environment and trust, actually, and the kind of bullet point there around the commitment to sharing, because I think that is really important. So I think particularly when you're looking at organizations, kind of small businesses coming together within a consortia environment, then the idea around commitment to sharing, you're going to have to share knowledge and intelligence and ideas, and that sometimes puts people in quite an uncomfortable situation, particularly when they feel that that knowledge, those ideas would potentially give them competitive advantage within, say, a grant bidding process or a tendering process if they were going to be working on an individual basis. And that's why the whole kind of idea around allowing yourselves time to build trust is really important. And Paul, I just wanted to bring you here in here around that kind of trust concept. I mean, you guys kind of probably all knew each other and worked together. You all knew each other within that that space. You all kind of knew each other within the sector. Did you kind of have to go through quite a bit of discussion around how you were going to trust each other, and how did you build trust up really when you were developing Drive?
Yeah, we did. We knew of each other, and like I say, the trade is traditionally very solitary. So occasionally you'd park up next to a driver and have a chat for 5 minutes. Initially, all of us, we wanted to be as transparent as possible. Every member gets to see every decision made, every job which goes into the system, every member sees, so nobody is creaming off the top, so to speak. Everything is done fairly and as transparently as possible. The trust issue, those who are members now, I'd say there's complete trust there. We've had members come on board who's only lasted a few weeks, a month maybe, and then they decided to go because they just can't get their head around working together, that principle of a cooperative spirit. Some find it alien, and you'll get that. You'll get some people who will just want to work on their own, do their own thing, and that's fine. But for those people who feel that they can work within a structure which values this cooperative principle, then that's what I think is one of our main selling points.
Yeah, no, I think I think you're right there. And I think, you know, ultimately cooperative working isn't for everybody, you know, and I think you can't, I think if you try to force that relationship, I think that's where you would get tensions then within your membership and within the kind of, you know, the joint group of organizations or individuals that you're trying to come together, you know, bring together. And I think coming back to your point, Paul, that, you know, you were very clear actually that you wanted to not just kind of have an alternative and kind of raise standards within the industry, but you wanted something different in terms of social value. So there was a different vision, wasn't there, that you kind of built your cooperative around. So was that, did you kind of work with the other drivers to kind of build that up initially, or was everybody on the same page from the outset, or did you have to bring people on that journey with you?
We probably had to bring people on the journey. Quite a few of us did have the same sort of vision for the company about where we wanted to go, being socially responsible. And as members joined and they heard about it and they could see the bigger picture, then they jumped on board with it as well. We've never really had any issues at all with members, current members, not getting it completely. Like I say, you'll have people who'll come and go who just won't get it, but this is the ones we got at the moment all get it completely.
Okay. And then just picking up kind of, you know, some of your points, Gillian, and you know, and I'm glad you brought them up actually, because sometimes I think organizations go into kind of, you know, joint working in a very naive manner, and that, you know, particularly if you've got good working relationships, that you don't need to put provisions in for if things go wrong, or, you know, how do you manage kind of fallouts, or, you know, just an assumption that everybody will, you know, treat the information that you share within confidence. I think, you know, one of the things you can do, particularly in the early stages when you're looking to develop your cooperative model, is if you don't want to jump into a legal structure, is almost putting some sort of terms of reference together, something quite simple that just gives people a starting structure for what the common principles are that are binding you as organizations together, why you're coming together. So it just reminds people, and it gives you then a platform on which to move forward. Now the other extreme of that, I mean, I've been involved in some consortia activity where organizations, there is a clear need that everybody recognizes, but there's so much level of kind of commercial suspicion that actually the only way we can get past that is, for example, with people, organizations signing non-disclosure agreements, you know, so there are very formal things that could be put in place, but there is obviously cost, you know, significant costs attached to that. And I think, you know, what I would, you know, the work that we do is to kind of, you know, work with organizations to kind of, again, build up that kind of shared sense of values, that shared sense of collaborative, cooperative spirit that hopefully can move people past then that need for those kinds of legal interventions. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes that is the kind of no-go for, you know, for some organizations to be involved. So I think, you know, there are remedies that you can use. And I think, you know, I always call them no-go areas. You have to use the time initially for organizations and individuals to be clear, well, what are the, you know, what's the no-go? What's the breaking point for me being involved in this? And Paul, in terms of drive, giving people freedom to still operate outside of the cooperative, was that something that, again, took quite a bit of discussion for everybody to feel comfortable in? Or did that just naturally happen as a part of the way in which your sector works?
It was a no-brainer, really. We had to. When we started, we obviously had no customer base, so we had to gain an income from somewhere else. As we've grown, we're working less and less with other companies. I mean, like I say, most drivers just work for Drive now. What we also done right at the beginning, I think it was our chair, he set out a code of conduct, which every member, every new member basically got to sign up to, which just sets out the standards which we're trying to achieve. So yeah, this code of conduct is basically our Bible, so to speak. Everybody have got one, everybody abides by it, and if for any reason, to be fair, we've never had any major complaints of any customers at all, but if we did have, then we go back to the code of conduct and say, well, this is what the standards we adhere to, it's got to be kept.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And you know, I suppose that kind of agreement, you know, it comes with different names, isn't it? You guys have got a code of conduct. For other organisations, it might be termed a kind of a members agreement, but it's kind of setting out what is the relationship that, you know, the cooperative wants with its members, what it expects from its members, and also what it expects in terms of the behaviour between its members, because you know those things all contribute to the success of the cooperative, which links to the kind of the idea around excellent communication between individuals. And I think, you know, when you look at, you know, the formalised structure the driver's got, you know, it's got a board of directors which has been nominated on behalf of its members to take those more strategic business decisions. But there needs to be clear protocols in place for the way in which then the cooperative, you know, works with its members. Now that's much easier when you've got a very small membership base to perhaps a kind of a cooperative where you've got a very large membership base. But interestingly, even small kind of consortia, sometimes, you know, where we get called in if there are problems, it's often because the communication processes have broken down and people don't feel they're being kept involved, or people feel that actually somebody has stepped outside of what they believed was their delegated authority to make a decision on behalf of the consortia. And that's all about governance, and those are the things that need time to kind of put that kind of governance structure in place. So Paul, how do you manage your kind of communication with your members? You know, how often does your board meet, for example, and then how do you bring your wider members and into that conversation space, but in a way that it doesn't kind of drag the cooperative down into too many meetings because you've actually just got business to do?
Yeah, well, since the lockdown, everybody's discovered Zoom and WhatsApp and everything else, and all the meetings are all online as today's is. So that's one less headache as well, as rather than get everybody together in one place, you just do it digitally, so to speak. Yeah, we've got certain rules we've got to adhere to down to our the cooperative society rules. Got to have an AGM every year, which every member attends, if they can, obviously.
Yeah.
We have a board meeting every month, but our rules only state every quarterly. But every month we get together and discuss whatever's gone on in the previous month, look at figures, what have you, and then everything is conveyed then to each member.
Okay, and I think that you know, is when you're communicating that, you know, back to each member. I think particularly in the early stages when you're setting up a consortia, one of the hardest things to do is keep momentum and to kind of build and make sure that you're moving forward. And again, you know, I've been involved with you know, clients where we've had kind of micro enterprises forming consortia. And you go to meetings and you almost feel as if you're in that film kind of Groundhog Day, because you're almost having the same discussion where you're kind of, people are just almost constantly reinforcing it's a good thing to do, but nobody's actually moving the agenda forward. And I think, you know, that can be really frustrating, and you know, that will, you know, breed apathy, I think, you know, from within the kind of membership. So those kind of last 2 points about keeping momentum, but keeping promises probably sounds a bit, you know, too woolly in my mind. It's actually having a work agenda where there's clarity around who is going to do what, but there needs to be commitment, you know, from those, whether they're individuals or whether they're kind of organisations that are forming the consortia, to deliver upon the early stage development work to be able to move forward. Otherwise, you're going to struggle there. So, how did you manage that, Paul, in the early stages? Because, you know, as somebody who's advised kind of the set of a cooperative for many years, there's a lot of work involved. So, how did you share the load, and how did you manage that practically?
Yeah, there was 8 of us who founded the company, and we each split into little subcommittees, so to speak, which then dealt with various issues, from what dispatch system, what communication system, what sort of logo, what even one name we're going to come up with. So not one person was overloaded with too much to do. We spread it out as much as we could. As time's gone on, our board, because every member at the time was a board member, every founding member was a board member. But over the last 18 months, we didn't need a board member of 8, a board size of 8. We've taken it down to 4 now. We've got to have 3, down to the cooperative rules. But and even so now, the board members will occasionally sort of ask another member if they can do something to do with, could be anything, could do with printing, get in touch with a printer or something to get more business cards.
Mm.
And it's delegated that way, and people seem to enjoy, most of them seem to enjoy the responsibility of actually doing something, as well as working with the cooperative, doing something a bit extracurricular as well, which is surprising, really.
Mm. And do you think that heightened commitment comes because, you know, they've got a different relationship with the cooperative? They see it's something that's almost theirs, you know, because of the governance point of view, they are members. So do you think that's really changed their attitude and their
without
approach?
a doubt? What we've seen during lockdown, we'd have there's quite a few members who went into shielding because of health issues, and we gave them the option to still be a member, but to stop paying the membership fees. But every one of them decided to no, we'll still pay the membership fees. It was a bare minimum, but they were still willing to pay a membership fee every month just to be a part of it. And you wouldn't have got that if they were working for another company, or will still pay our admin every week just to feel a part of it, because they're not a part of anything with another company. With Drive, we formed a community, and it sounds a bit corny, but a family sort of spirit, where we all just look out for each other, really.
I think that, you know, that's a great point in terms of, you know, that definition of community and how you can apply a community within your membership setting. And for me, I think the biggest takeaway is that takes work, doesn't it? It takes work, it takes time, and it takes planning in terms of thinking about the structure. You know, I think, you know, sometimes the biggest challenge with joint working models is that people can just assume that kind of joint working spirit and that community will just naturally evolve. But I think you have to help people, you have to give people, you know, it doesn't have to be onerous, but I think you have to give people structures. So there's clarity in the way they work, there's simple processes, as we put here, clearly set boundaries, and there's clarity on individuals' roles when delivering work, and there's clarity around kind of sharing of workload, and all of that I think contributes then to a more successful kind of outcome and a successful foundation for the cooperative to move forward.
From the outset, the Social Business Wales and the Wales Cooperative Centre, they were a massive help to us. I mean, legal frameworks, things which as taxi drivers we had no grasp of at all. Policies for employing people, even though we're not at that stage yet, that's all in place. And the help where they gave funding for us to be mentored by Mark from Southend, that was huge, because they had all the answers. They'd been through what we'd been through. There was only 4 of them who formed their company, and now they're one of the biggest companies in Southend. So any problems we had, you went straight to Mark. He's still at the end of the phone now if we had any problems, and he'd help us. He's that cooperative spirit, even though he's the other side of the country, still willing to help. And since we've started, we've had people from Preston get in touch with us. We're quite active on social media, so people from Preston, drivers from Preston who's interested in starting up a cooperative, people from down in Sussex interested in starting a cooperative. And I think as a trade, taxi drivers is set up to be driver owned, completely. You can cut out the middleman as a trade, and we can be the middleman. The drivers get to keep more of the profits. So I think there's really a scope for it to get across more of the country, I think.
Yeah, and you brought up one of the kind of one of the cooperative principles. Actually, I can never remember the order of the number. I think it's cooperative principle 5. It's cooperation amongst cooperatives, which is try saying that really quickly is a bit of a tongue twister, but I think I think it's true. I think if you're an organisation that runs and lives its cooperative values, then you're not threatened. You wouldn't see that as a threat if you then work with other cooperatives, to support them. When you look at the kind of Basque Country and the kind of the whole Mondragon structure, it's actually expected when your kind of cooperative gets to a certain size, you will then support the spin out of a new cooperative, and that's the kind of self-evolving nature of that kind of cooperative network. It's fascinating, really, and that for me, that's the bit that we kind of sometimes miss a little bit of ways, is that kind of, you know, how do we build that cooperative network, that cooperation amongst cooperatives to strengthen the whole movement?
Yeah, I mean, we try and work with as many cooperatives as possible. Like I say, IndieCube, where we're based, is a cooperative. Obviously, our cooperative bank, which ain't particularly a cooperative, so to speak, but even some of the supported living providers, they're registered charities down as cooperatives, and they've chosen us because we sort of have got the same sort of principles.
Yeah,
and they use us as, like I say, their go-to taxi service.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Ben, can you go on a slide for me? So coming up to some challenges really, and again, you know, these aren't challenges that you know, that aren't you know, that you can't overcome, but I think again it's really important to acknowledge these challenges, because I think you have to build these into your early stage considerations when you're setting up any joint kind of venture vehicle, you know, whether you're kind of, you know, a group of freelancers or a kind of a group of businesses, or even, you know, I think again, you know, there's really a good opportunity to kind of think of a partnership model between freelancers and small businesses, because again, you know, you're thinking about bringing together kind of, you know, common and complementary services into something that has got kind of a bigger offer really to the marketplace. I mean, we've talked about communication. I think sometimes it's interesting, isn't it, particularly if you've got, you know, if you're an individual operating as a freelancer, or you know, you're a small business, I think that whole concern around diluting identity is something that, you know, is often, you know, we often gets brought up as being a particular challenge when you're setting up a consortia, that, you know, I've worked really hard, you know, to set up my business brand, and now you're asking me to kind of get rid of my business brand. And, you know, that's not what joint working is about. You know, we're not asking people to disband any kind of brands that they've developed, but it's thinking about, well, what can the consortia do to add value to that brand that you're not able to kind of leverage by working by yourselves? So I think that's one of the key things to note. And then again, you know, kind of people feeling that they're losing kind of client contact, or losing control really. And I think, Paul, from your perspective, I mean, did that, you know, when you're kind of I suppose that was one of the things that for your members, the way in which you guys were operating through those other companies, actually the cooperative, the reverse of that really, this was the opportunity about you retaking back control, wasn't it, as opposed to losing control?
Yeah, working for other companies, you had no control. You've done what they said, or you left the company basically.
Yeah.
Whereas with us, every member has got control of the company. So yeah, control's a big aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think the other kind of challenge there around imbalanced collaborative kind of partnerships, and I think particularly where you've got perhaps, you know, kind of collaborations or consortium models where you've got some really big kind of organizations and some small organizations, but together, you know, the collective offer is strong, but it's how you make sure there is a balance of power, you know. And I think, you know, you guys have always, as you said, you know, one member, one vote. And, you know, the work that we would do, for example, and I'm, you know, kind of, you know, when you're working with the Hive program as well, is looking at, well, how do you build in that kind of cooperative democratic model when you've got organizations perhaps who are members of different sizes? And I think that's something to, you know, that you have to really kind of consider quite carefully really when you're setting up a consortia. I mean, Paul, did you know, it's always an interesting one as well when you've got kind of like a core set of founders who set up a cooperative, and then, you know, you're 2 years later and all of a sudden now you've got kind of, you know, you started off with 8 and then you've got kind of 20, 30, 40 members. Any kind of feeling there of, oh gosh, you know, we're giving these new people the same kind of power and decision as us, and we've been in it from the start? Any kind of, you know, resistance there? You know, it comes up.
Yeah, it does. We had one particular founding member who was quite defensive of other people coming in. So it had to be explained that that's the only way the company's going to grow, is having extra members. More members mean more work. So yeah, it was quite a conversation with him, to say the least. That, I mean, our chair is very diplomatic, and he explains everything a lot clearer than I do. And he should be on these things, but he never does. He can explain things very, very simply, and he puts people's mind at rest. Put it that way. The members who seem to be the directors, who were afraid of new members coming on board because they felt they were losing control. Their minds were put at ease by our chair, because he did explain everything, and he just laid out hopefully what the next 18 months, 2 years are going to be like.
Yeah, no, that's important, and you know what we've certainly found, and you know I've personally experienced through some of the kind of work I've done in this field, is sometimes it actually helps to have an independent kind of, you know, facilitator for certain discussions. So, you know, everybody then, you're all on an equal playing field, do you know what I mean? Whereas if one of the members is leading that discussion, it can almost mean that, you know, they're kind of driving that agenda, which can sometimes then kind of cause this feeling of lack of kind of parity or kind of lack of equality then between everybody. So, you know, there's something to think about really in the value and use of kind of external advisors, or just, you know, external people to support that process. Is, you know, you can support it, you know, kind of equality, but also, you know, I've been kind of prepped in advance that I'm to ask questions that nobody else has been able to ask, because they're bloody uncomfortable questions, and I can ask them, you know, because I'm that kind of, you know, independent person coming in, and I'm allowed to play a bit of devil's advocate. So, you know, that can actually be quite healthy really, where perhaps members have been a little bit afraid or hesitant of asking particular questions because they don't want to get other people's backs up, but it's a really credible question that needs to be asked, because they can foresee a situation or an issue that needs to be addressed. But it's, you know, it's just managing those kind of relationships, isn't it, early on. Did you find that? Did you find just having that kind of independence as part of your kind of development process helpful?
Yes, definitely. Like I say, the help you've had from Mark Jennings in Southend, he has sometimes, if a driver has brought up, a member has brought up an issue which we didn't really have an answer for, we'd go to Mark and say, well, yeah, that happened to us. And he convey what they done. So yeah, everybody's got a voice with us. So if there's any problems, we try and make sure that any problems are put forward to everybody. And touch wood, so far we haven't had any major problems with any disputes amongst us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. Ben, do you want to go on a slide? Just a couple of more things really, just for you to consider. Again, you know, who should I work with? And, you know, Eva, when she was on the call, you know, that was one of her points, you know, is who else is out there? And it's always been a difficult one for us, because we've never played the role of being a kind of a broker. And, you know, it is hard, you know, particularly if you're looking to find partners. But, you know, webinars like this are always kind of useful, and, you know, it's looking at perhaps the kind of, you know, the organizations that represent the sectors that you're looking to get involved with. You know, things such as Meet the Buyer events are always really useful as well, because you get to know then other people who are looking to deliver services within that space. So it's trying to put yourself out there as much as possible, really. And we always kind of say that there's no kind of hard and fast rules in terms of, you know, who you should work with. But again, I think what you've all got to come to a kind of a common decision on is the common things that bind you together, and why it's a benefit for you to work with those other people. Because if that's not clear, you will never be able to move the joint kind of, you know, your consortia forward or your cooperative forward. There needs to be that clarity from the outset, really. And I mean, Paul, when you set up Drive, you know, that the idea of kind of, you know, geographical coverage and how you operated. I mean, you know, do you see Drive only ever kind of working in Cardiff, or do you see perhaps Drive expanding, you know, in kind of in 20 years time, you know, how do you see Drive operating? You know, that's a question for you.
We will always be a Cardiff-based company. The way Uber operate, where they use loopholes in the law and bring in other drivers from other areas to flood the market, is not something we want to do. We will only work within what we believe the legislation is. That's open to interpretation. That's how Uber get away with what they do.
Mm-hmm.
We'll only take on Cardiff licensed drivers. That's due to legislation. We're a Cardiff licensed operator. We have to take on Cardiff licensed drivers. We can't take on anybody else.
Okay.
We can't see us, and to be honest, unless other drivers in other areas wanted to use the Drive name, that's something we can look at in the future, maybe. But maybe if somebody in a Vale wanted to form a cooperative, they could come on board with us and sort of jump on our tail, so to speak, and not be lumbered with most of the legwork which we had to do, which we wouldn't mind doing, but it would be a complete separate entity to what we are doing at Drive in Cardiff.
Yeah, okay. So potential scope then to kind of expand their network out, you know, so almost kind of Drives becomes this kind of hub then for other kind of, you know,
yeah. I mean, they've done it in Southend with they got the Southend Authority and they got smaller authorities around Southend.
Right, okay.
And they have expanded that way as well in Southend, so their cooperative is growing out as well. But it's not something we've actually actively talked about expanding Drive that way at the moment.
Okay, no, that's interesting. And then Ben, can you skip on 2 slides for me? So can you skip the next one and then go to the one after? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So this is the kind of last formal bit of content I just wanted to share with you. And again, you know, I'm touching the surface here today in this webinar, you know, in terms of the things that you need to think about for joint working. And there's some really interesting kind of resources out there as well, you know, available through Cooperatives UK, but also, you know, have a look at the Hive website. There's some really good resources there. Have a look through the Social Business Wales website as well. And there's also some really good resources. So for example, the joint bidding guide that I was involved in, which we published, probably 7 years ago now, but it's still incredibly relevant, looking at, you know, the kinds of considerations that you need to go through. But obviously, you know, there is development support available out there as well through the Hive and obviously through Social Business Wales. So I encourage any of you to kind of, you know, to take that up really. So in terms of, you know, the kind of the things that you have to decide, and particularly around the kind of, you know, the legal entity, I'm just wondering, Paul, you know, you said that was probably the thing that you guys were probably most furthest away from in terms of your knowledge was around the legal entity. You know, the kind of the structure that you've chosen where, you know, you all have a share in the business. You know, did that, you know, when Social Business Wales took you through that process, did that just feel right, or was there quite a bit of discussion, you know, between, you know, you as members as to what was the appropriate legal vehicle for you to use?
No. Once we got it explained to us, it was quite an easy decision to make. The legal structure we're in, and the fact that every member will have one share in the company, that was, like I say, quite an easy decision to make.
Yeah, but I think also as well, you know, you would need a legal structure as well to support not just the kind of governance and of the way in which the members engage with it and the ownership elements, but also, you know, you very clearly got a social agenda at the heart of your business as well. You know, and you've got that not-for-profit element, which needs a particular type of legal structure. So it just shows, and again, you know, a take-home message for those who are on this call is, you know, the legal bit. People like to jump into that because they think that's the hardest bit and that's the thing that's got to be tackled first. That's the bit that needs to be tackled last, you know, because you need to be clear how you're going to operate, what you want to do, the way in which you're going to operate, and then the legal structure kind of wraps around that then. So did you feel, Paul, confident in that process really, where you were all very clear what it was that you wanted to do, and the fact you wanted to do something different to what the current market was doing, and then find the kind of structure to support that?
Yes. We see ourselves at Drive, the company, as just like an agent, so to speak. Work comes to us, and the work gets divvied out to drivers equally and fairly. We can see in the future huge benefits for people like local authorities. Cardiff Council is a cooperative in itself. The way we work, not for profit, things like school contracts, the money could be saved by local authorities that way, because we're not for profit, because we don't take a cut of anything. We've got mutual trading status, so every money we've got to make sure that every penny which comes into our account goes out of our account to the drivers. So if we've got an account customer, every penny goes to the drivers. We can make a profit on that. We don't take put anything on top to make us a profit, because we can't. That's our legal structure. So it could save, like I say, it could save local authorities a hell of a lot of money, because at the moment you've got people doing school run contracts which pay drivers, but they also make a profit on top. So they'll charge for council X amount, pay the drivers Y amount. We would charge for council X amount and pay the driver X amount, because we can't make profit. That's our legal structure.
Yeah.
So the scope is huge, and it could save how a lot of people have a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly something that we're kind of trying to push out there really, is the need for a way of doing things differently, but it's a sustainable way of doing things differently. And I think, a lot of people consider that, the cooperative way of doing things slightly more risky, but actually there's so much evidence of the sustainability of the model through the way in which it kind of engages with people in a different way. I think never more really has there been a time that we need to be looking at more kind of, community based. When I say community, like you said, your members are a community. It's community based kind of business models that can, just change the way in which we work.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the kind of, the end of the kind of content of the webinar really. Ben, I don't know if you just want to go on to the last slide for me, and again, just to reinforce, the support available through the Hive program. The kind of the website is there, but obviously contact us if you need some additional support, and we can point you in their direction. A massive thank you to Paul. Paul, I know I've worked you hard today, because obviously I didn't preempt you that I was going to kind of run the second part, more like kind of Q&A, so I think you probably need to go and lie down in a dark room. But no, I really appreciate your kind of contributions, because I think you kind of practically bring it all to life really. And before I end, has anybody else got any kind of questions or comments that they want to bring forward? No? Well, it just leaves me to say then thank you very much for engaging with the webinar. Thanks, Ben, for your tech support as always. And Paul, yeah, massive thank you to yourself. And yeah, hopefully we'll catch you soon on a number of Social Business Wales Cooperative Centre webinar events and that we're running. And yeah, keep an eye on the Co-op Hive as well for activity that they'll be putting out there. And actually, there's a number of these webinars now that will be available through the Hive, because we'll be kind of sending the link here. So there's lots of really good information that you can access through those guys as well. So yeah, brilliant. Really lovely to see you all this morning. Thank you.
Big thanks to everyone, especially you, Paul. Well done, bud.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks everybody. Bye. Bye.